Sanibonani, good evening, Dumelang, and welcome to episode 151 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. It's a Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast, and we're very excited to have you join us this evening, whether you're watching us from Facebook, from Twitter, from Instagram, or from YouTube. Welcome to the podcast. We do hope that you're going to enjoy your stay with us this evening. And you're also, if you're a first-time viewer, be able to go back to all the incredible episodes that we've had before to catch up on some of the great content that you have missed out on. And of course, if it's also your first time, then you also want to make sure that you keep your eyes glued to your screen on some of the other incredible programs that we have across our social media platforms. That is the farming podcast that actually aired earlier this afternoon. It was at 1 o'clock with Umbali Mogo, and that show comes every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m., focusing on all things agriculture. So if you ever have an interest in farming and want to get a better sense of the full value chain really of farming, the different ways that you can get into farming, the different ways that you should be thinking of before you even spend a cent towards your agricultural ambitions, then that is the podcast for you. We also have the First Time Home Buyers show that comes to your screen every single Wednesday, just after this podcast at 7:45. And the First Time Home Buyers show this coming Wednesday is going to be looking at 5 mistakes on our first time property purchase and how you can avoid them. And they'll be speaking to the Nong brothers. I'm sure you know them from when we had them here on the Private Property Podcast. So they'll be going through some of the mistakes that they made on their first property purchase. And if you're a first time home buyer and perhaps you're still a bit confused and you want to make sure that you avoid some of those mistakes, then do make sure that you tune into that show tomorrow evening. And we never leave you alone over the weekend. Chad is always there to keep you company, where we profile some of the best estates the country has on offer. That is, of course, on the Developers Show. And if anything, one of the things that we're also doing this week, of course, is we celebrated yesterday 150 episodes of the Private Property Podcast, and we gave away that 1,000 Rand cash prize. And because we're in a very giving and festive mood, we're also going to be doing that giveaway throughout the week. So every single day for the rest of this week, we'll be giving away 500 Rand rather. Look at me feeling very generous and being Santa. 500 Rand every single day. Right here on the Private Property Podcast. I see the Top Fan gang, giving their cheers and welcoming us all on our Facebook page. Ubongani Mabunda, I see you. I also saw, and I know she won our competition last week. I see Jamana Sanders, who's usually watches us on our Facebook page. I think I also saw Mahlatso earlier, one of the Ring members there on Facebook. Welcome to everybody at home, all our regular and of course our new viewers. And if you want to stand a chance of winning that 500 Rand cash prize throughout this week, then all you have to do is to tell us, what you've learned as you've been watching the live podcast for the past, 8, I think we've been around for 8 months, for 151 episodes. What have been some of the key episodes that have stood out? And one really big lesson did you learn that you were able to implement even in your own property journey? Share that with us down here below, and you stand a chance of walking away with that 500 Rand cash prize. And remember, one of the big things with this giveaway, you have to be watching us live in order for you to be eligible to win that amount, because we're going to announce the winner. You have to be able to raise your hand while we are live on air. We'll give you a minute or two to be able to do so. And if you don't, then we're going to go on to the next winner. We saw yesterday's winner was live on air. I was quite anxious, and I'm very glad that they're live on air. And we do hope whoever's going to win this evening's episode will also be watching us so they can claim their 500 Rand cash prize. Well, to get started with this evening's conversation, because we love talking property matters, we love learning new things about our property so that we can be better equipped to make the right decisions on our property journey. I'm joined this evening by Darrel, who's the MD of Willis Realtor, and we're looking at 4 things that could jeopardize your property sale. This is after an offer to purchase has been signed. A lot of people right now are looking at buying property, meaning that there are a lot of sellers as well. So we want to better understand what are those things that could jeopardize that particular property sale once you have found the right buyer who signed that offer to purchase. Darrel, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's only a pleasure, Darrel. I think, One of the big things that we've been talking about recently, and especially as this week is a big week, we know that interest rates may, go up, go down, remain the same. We're obviously all wishing they'll go down, even if it's just by 25 basis points. Is that a lot of people are talking about these historically low interest rates and the demand for property. We're seeing a lot of entrants in the property space, but property deals or property transactions aren't always as straightforward, because different things can happen along the way. And I think sometimes whether the buyer or the seller, they can sometimes do something that could jeopardize that sale or purchase without them probably even realizing it. Perhaps take us through, that one of the important things we need to be thinking about as we, selling a property, or when you are buying a property that could potentially jeopardize that particular transaction.
Well, Zama, I would say to you that the journey requires and hands-on people that want to walk this journey with you. That's the first bit of advice I would give to either any buyer or any seller. Besides the 4 risks, there are numerous risks out there. But having thought about some things that you and I wanted to speak about, the 4 were the mortgage loan not being granted. Can you imagine? So you've got an offer to purchase. Both parties are extremely excited because they've got this offer to purchase. And now all of a sudden, somebody comes along and says, the buyer doesn't qualify. Invariably, maybe deposits have already been paid. And, each one of these is basically a long conversation in itself. But secondly, property valuation, not high enough. So, or low enough. Think about, you've signed an offer to purchase. You as a buyer see value in a house and you want it. And the bank come to you and they say to you, there's not enough value for us to lend you the money. So there's another depressing thought. Death of either of the parties involved is another one we didn't even, think about. A cooling off period where the property value is below 250,000 Rand for first-time home buyers, because they don't understand that there's levies, rates and taxes. There's a lot of add-on costs. You're not just talking about paying the bond back. You're talking about being a responsible person. Now you're paying rates and taxes, electricity, sewage, and all these things, and nobody's ever walked this journey with you. Home inspection. We're all speaking about home inspection and where this is going to happen, when it's going to happen, when it's going to become law, and that what happens if we see a defect in the property? Property value is going to go down. From a buyer's point of view, you're going to get peace of mind, but sellers shouldn't be scared, because they too, with the Consumer Protection Act, are going to have the peace of mind of having these sort of inspections done. And that, in a nutshell, is basically where I would like to say to you, what about if clearance figures from SARS, municipality, and those sort of things are not available? Take COVID, for instance. All of a sudden, municipal offices are closed, SARS are closed. You can't do transactions anymore. Now, everything's got a deadline. Your OTP has got 5 days to be accepted. The guy can't do it, or the next process, the 30 days for the deposit or the bond to be granted. That can't happen because the clearance figures haven't happened. So you can see the dominoes start to fall and everybody starts getting affected. So estate agents run this risk all the time. They understand these risks, they mitigate them for themselves and for their clients. Now, clients, when you say, I work for the seller. No, the seller might have appointed you, but the buyer will be your next customer if you're thinking long-term for your business. So you need to be impartial and genuine in your way you handle the people. Now, people say, I can do this myself. I'm saying, maybe 6 times out of 10, you might get it right. But those 4 people that are using agents have the peace of mind that they are running a lot less risk than the 6 people. That's a given. And it backs it up. Properties with agents get a higher value. That's, and all these 4 points that we've spoken about tonight are things that experienced agents will know how to get around.
And Darrel, I actually want us to expand on some of them, because I think it is one of those things where you might encounter them. So almost want to get a better sense for viewers at home, what should they be doing in the event where some of these things happen, whether it's from the buyer side or from the seller side, because we realize that, as we're saying, we are living in COVID time. I've also seen instances where so many things take longer than they should, because people are not working from their offices. And so even the deeds office, getting lodgement to happen is a nightmare right now. And you're almost having to call your attorney every single day, and they'll tell you, look, we keep going, but we're still not being able to lodge because there's a backup. There are people whose properties were supposed to be lodged from when we went into lockdown, and still so many months later, it still hasn't happened. So we're even seeing, at every single stage of the property transaction, that there could potentially be hurdles along the way. And it isn't because that's the way that things are, or it's some of the things that we've touched on, but because we're now living in COVID time, so there's also just this other barrier, essentially, that's making things just that much harder for us. The first thing that you actually mentioned was the loan not being granted. And actually want us to expand on that one a little bit, because I think people at home might think, but why would you then sign that offer to purchase if perhaps you haven't worked, let's say, with a bond originator? We always give our viewers at home, that tip of always get a bond originator, so that you also get a sense of how much you qualify for. You've got that certificate. They already have all the paperwork ready for you. So by the time you see that property, you're signing, they'll approach the banks for you, and your odds of having that successful application are substantially higher. Let's look at perhaps some of the reasons why that loan might not get granted, and what should happen. And I know oftentimes offer to purchase, they have really great clauses around this one, but for purposes of our viewers at home, then what happens in the event where something like that, a seller essentially encounters that?
Well, I think, the most glaring one is probably, you spoke about the interest rates. So the interest rates went down. Everybody jumps from being a tenant. Real estate is an amazing thing. When I'm selling a lot of property, then I'm not renting many out. So there's always, balance in real estate. Because when I'm renting a lot of property, I'm not generally selling because the interest rates are high. So, so you mentioned that the interest rates are low at the moment. So we all of a sudden got this abundance of buyers that are probably first-time buyers wanting to get into the property market. They have their deposits, they've done their due diligence, and they've looked at the area they want to be. What happens when we start jumping to a 50 basis point increase, or a 75 basis points increase?
Don't speak 75 basis points. We do not mention that number. We haven't even had that kind of decrease. We're not going to speak about such an increase.
Okay.
At most.
Tito doesn't watch this show, so don't stress. Okay.
You'd be surprised, actually, Darrel. You'd be very surprised. So do not mention things like that, because between him and the governor, you'd be very surprised who tends to watch the show. So I think we need to be careful about things we put out there.
So, but that would have a disastrous effect on us right now. We're making sales. We're getting through COVID. I think, some of your bigger real estates, us being a big boutique agency, we really have people that want to work with us, both from the seller and buyer point of view. So we're pretty insular in that because we get referrals from past clients. That's how we build our business. But where you are in the bigger agencies, this has got a massive drive because their clients walk in, very sort of on a day-to-day basis, but the relationship isn't there. So they need to quickly make this happen. So I think what I'm telling you about interest rates or the finance not being approved because of, you think, if a person has bounced a check or a debit order has not affected, what effect has that got on their bond? It has, because your credit rating goes down. Credit ratings are one of the biggest things that you need to protect, okay? So that bonds, those sort of things, are not jeopardized. But you're not getting your bond approved. So yes, you've got pre-approval. But remember, once you've got pre-approval, you now got to jump through all the hoops that the bank wants you to jump through. And in that process, you've got to be very, very careful that you do not extend yourself by having, I want a bond, but I also want a car loan, but I also want a Truworths account, But you know what? There's also that party that I want to get the flight down to Durban, July, And so all that money leaving your bank is disposable income that should be staying there to highlight to the bank that you can afford this mortgage.
And I think that's actually such an important thing that you're raising, Darrel, because oftentimes, especially first-time home buyers, tend to not budget for the cost of buying a home. So in as much as you may get 100% bond from the bank, there's still costs that you're going to have to pay out of your pocket. Sometimes, not even sometimes, we're looking at bond registration attorneys, the transferring attorneys, and just those two costs alone can be quite high. So in the event where you haven't budgeted and put money aside and you don't have any savings that you're able to tap into, it means that I've certainly seen a lot of people who end up taking out a personal loan or extending their credit card limit in order for them to be able to pay for that. And doing things like that can actually have an effect on that home loan being granted to you. And if anything, you don't want to get into debt while you're getting property. I mean, it's actually a very big thing that even my business partners and I, tend to talk about, because sometimes people will be like, okay, maybe must I just take a personal loan out so I can finance this? You typically don't want to do that because the interest rates of the debt that you're about to take out tends to be so high that even when you run your numbers and you think, look, I'll just pay it off, you really paid off, in 2 months' time because you didn't have that kind of money. It's probably money that takes you a couple of months to be able to save up. Then there's always going to be something that happens, that prevents you from maximizing payment into that particular facility. So I think, to be honest, we always just need to be careful when it comes to those ones. I want us to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be, exploring some of the things that Darrel said in depth. One of them is in the event where there's a death during a transaction. And I want Darrel to address this one because it was actually a question that was asked by one of our viewers in yesterday's Q&A. We didn't get to it, but the team did send it through to me. So it was a question that I think came in from Facebook. So you're quite lucky that we'll be able to address it this evening so that you're better able to understand what then happens if, let's say, the seller, passes away in the middle of a property transaction. What can you do? What can be done? And especially if you're relatively far ahead in the transaction, as opposed to if you're just at the beginning of that transaction. We're going to go for a quick break and we'll be taking your questions and comments just after this. Welcome back to episode 151 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. And this evening, we're looking at the things that could jeopardize your property sale after an offer to purchase has been signed. And to help us better understand what those things are and what we could potentially do to mitigate them should you find yourself in the middle of them, I'm joined by Darrel, who's the Managing Director at Willis Property. We are taking your questions and comments when it comes to this one. Perhaps you've found yourself in the middle of a property transaction and something happens that has essentially stalled the transaction or even paused it altogether. Perhaps at the end, nothing ended up happening. Do send through those questions and comments around this particular one. We've got a question here. It's coming from Umar Kashingang, one of our top fan gang members on Facebook, who asks, so what happens when I've signed an offer to purchase with a developer that commits me to pay a deposit, then I'm no longer able to? Can the buyer take me to task for this?
So he is the developer.
So I think they mean, can the developer take me to task, not the buyer? So can the developer take them as the buyer to task?
I would say that without having all the details, I'm very reluctant to say yes or no, Zama. For the simple reason that the OTP, on what basis would you want to walk away from the transaction? What has created the scenario? That is it an emotional thing that you just want to do it because, or have your circumstances changed? Are we talking Consumer Protection Act protection here, or are we talking it's not giving us enough information to make to give them a concrete answer. But there are times that it could happen that he could walk away, but there are times when he would forfeit that deposit.
I think the big thing is to understand the clauses in that particular offer to purchase, because it would typically stipulate things like, this holds in the event where they get that grant from the bank. So you're not going to be held liable in the event where you can't get a grant. Sometimes you actually even say that you want 100%, as opposed to if a bank only, let's say, extends 70%, meaning that you've now tied yourself to that particular offer to purchase. So always make sure, as we always say, that you understand the terms of the offer to purchase in their entirety. And if there's a clause that you don't, particularly understand, make sure that you follow up and ask the agent, or if you want it amended, then make sure that that essentially happens. We've got a comment and question here. This one coming from Ivan Ndlovu. He says, Tito is watching you guys, and he continues to then ask, can a pre-approved bond or pre-approval rather jeopardize a property sale if the price of the property keeps changing? So I think the best way to understand this one, because I've seen it quite a lot, you typically tend to find that sometimes, let's say as an owner, I have more than one estate agency selling my property, and they essentially listed with 3 different prices. So 3 different prices are put up. So can that potentially jeopardize the sale of the property? Because obviously as a seller, you keep seeing all these different prices that are listed on privateproperty.co.za.
Okay, so I think this is really it's going slightly off our 4 points, but it's a very important point what he's saying, in that agents put in their marketing thing slightly different numbers or slightly different sizes of property, okay? And that to me is, you're running a risk both for the seller, because if Ivan, for instance, wants to buy a property and has made now an offer to purchase with the lowest ranked price, but he saw the property with the highest price agent, who's entitled to the commission? So now you run the risk as the seller of paying commission to both the highest ranked agent and the lowest priced agent. You agree with me?
And I think there, Darrel, one of the big things, and I remember we once spoke to an estate agent. One of the big things when you're a seller is sometimes it does help to give a sole mandate and make sure that you know that that one agent is going to focus on that particular property, and you're not going to have issues of 4 different listings. Maybe they're not even bringing in that many people, and people end up, especially during this period, people are easily going to be able to put in cheeky offers because they can see that there are 4 different agents that have been listed, 4 different prices. So there must be something. Sometimes I think people, myself included, sometimes just get skeptical of what's wrong with this, because sometimes it even stays on the market for an extended period of time, and it doesn't sell as quickly. Now, a question here that I really like comes from Utepa Mokubudi, also on Facebook, who's saying, what happens after signing the offer to purchase as a buyer? Then you find out during the inspection that there are faults like severe plumbing, electricity, etc. And as a buyer, you're no longer interested.
Remember, as part of the offer to purchase, you would have put in a clause that it is subject to the inspection by an independent, whether it's house check or an independent body. And that would null and void the offer to purchase. If you said that I'm no longer interested without doing the inspection, I think you would have a problem. Okay? Because you couldn't back that up with an independent verification. And that's why inspection by an independent body, in my mind, makes sense and protects both parties.
And Darrel, to just go back to one of the earlier points that you have actually raised, because I did say this was a question that was asked in yesterday's Q&A that we weren't able to get to, was one of the things that could potentially jeopardize the property, the sale of a property after the offer to purchase has been signed, is in the event of a death. So if there's a death of either party that's involved, I want us to explore what would happen in the event where there's the death of the seller, because I know the buyer will speak to briefly right now, but what happens if there's a death of a seller? And let's say this is relatively at a progressed stage of the property transaction.
Well, again, it's such a broad thing. And if you don't have the agent and an attorney giving you advice and going through this process with you, it becomes a landmine, because if the seller passes away, first of all, say the company is in a company. Now the property is in a company. The property is in a company. Okay. So there are other directors in the company, not too much of a problem, because the signatories can change and the transaction goes ahead. If he is the sole owner of the property, then the master of the court's got to get involved, and he makes the decisions on behalf of the estate of the deceased person. And that then could extend this whole transaction, if not null and void it completely, but extend it for sure. So the buyer then runs the risk, if they're in the property, of paying a much longer period of occupational rental, if that's an option, or of not having a place to stay. If that could, if they were not going to take it, if they were waiting for it to tap the occupation to happen on transfer. So it's the small clauses that are going to dictate how you get handled as the buyer, and how the transaction or the title deeds of the property are in place, or what is in place at that time.
And then let's now reverse it, Darrel. What then happens if it's the buyer who unfortunately passes away during the property transaction?
Remember, as the agent, you need to advise your client in the best possible way. My thing in these sort of things, it's emotional. It is probably not going to get resolved in a short space of time for you. You are not, while you feel sorry for the person or the parties that have lost their loved one, okay, you're not part of that transaction. And I mean, it's not trying to be callous. You're saying, I'm running the risk for my family. I cannot carry the risk for somebody else's family. So you need to then be able to say to them, it is in your interests to either walk away if you have had advice from the attorneys involved in the transaction, because they might be able to turn around and say to you, this can happen because of, again, the property belongs to a CC, or the parties were married in community of property, or you being the buyer, the wife still wants the property, you know, and she can fund this on her own. So again, it's all the points need to be read, understood, and advice given on each particular transaction.
Okay. Okay. Darrel, before we wrap it up and before I let you go, I mean, you've given us a nice overview of some of the things that we should certainly be mindful of that could jeopardize a property sale. And the reality of them is that the way to resolve them isn't always black and white. It really does depend where in the property transaction you are, whether you're buying in your individual capacity, you're buying in a PTY, or another entity, and the ease with which that particular entity is able to then essentially continue doing business, especially if, for example, you're not the sole director, as you're saying. And before I do let you go, what's the final tip that you'd give to viewers at home about things that potentially could jeopardize the property transaction that they must always bear in mind, regardless of whether you're a buyer or a seller, especially during this time? Because I think regardless of, I think for one moment, if we put aside the hurdles that we'll face because of COVID and having to rejig the way that we do things, but when we look at the fundamentals, what are some of the things that that one thing that we must always bear in mind when it comes to things that sometimes jeopardize a property transaction or ends up having it not happening altogether?
In anything in life, you are going to need advice of specialists. Property is your 99% of people's biggest investment. That's going to be and will always be. But, and they've got to walk the path with someone they trust. And there will always be people that will want to make this industry better. And I believe that the industry is in a good place. No one wants to deliberately hurt anybody else. We all want to live a good life and have a smooth process, smooth transaction, least amount of disruptions as possible. How do you do that? You communicate, you keep communicating, asking the questions, giving each other the assurance that we're doing the right thing. If we watch what we go on, we don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know, but we can get the answers from someone else, And if you do that on behalf of your client, then you can only be a success.
Well, Darrel, that's a great note to leave it on. Making sure that you work with professionals and you get the right insight from professionals is so important. I think sometimes people, you want to save your randelas as much as possible, but make sure that you're not saving money you're not cutting corners essentially in order to save that money, because those are the kinds of things ultimately, because those are essentially the kinds of things that are going to cost you money in the long run. And if anything, in the situation like this won't even be in the long run. In the very short run, you're going to end up losing money. Darrel, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
No, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
And that's
Have a good
Darrel.
evening.
Thank you very much, Darrel. And that is Darrel Willis, who's the MD at Willows Realty. We're going to go for a quick break. And when we come back, we will be announcing the winner of that 500 Rand cash prize. Remember, you have to be tuned in so that you can raise your hand when we announce who the lucky winner is. That's the only way that you can claim your prize. If you don't do so in the first minute or two, then we're going to have to go to the second person who's going to potentially win that 500 Rand cash prize. We're going to go for a quick break and we'll be back just after this. Welcome back to the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. Well, it's that time in the evening where we announce the lucky viewer who walks away with a 500 Rand cash prize. And if you'd like to also be a potential winner right here on the Private Property Podcast, then all you have to do is enter our competition. We want to hear from you what valuable lesson you've learned from watching our 150 episodes of the Private Property Podcast. You can share just one. I'm sure there are quite a number of them, and how that particular lesson has impacted your life or your property journey. We've shared the competition details and the link to enter the competition down here below. And to our viewers who are watching us on Instagram and YouTube, we're only running this particular competition on Facebook. So the only way you can even get that link and enter is on our Facebook channel. So make sure that you go through to Facebook in order to be able to enter. And one of the big T's and C's with this particular one is you have to be watching us live so you can claim the prize live on air, and that's how you get to walk away with that prize. If you don't, then we're going to go to the next person in line who is going to win. As usual, I'm going to read what the person said first, and then we'll announce who the lucky winner is. And they've written, I've learned so much from the live podcast, from how location plays an important role when purchasing a property. I've also learned about purchasing repossessed property and the pros and its pros and cons. Very informative show. I may not be in the market for property, but I surely enjoy your podcast. It has taught me a lot about property and finances. Great show. And we really do appreciate that. And the lucky winner who walks away, or potentially rather walks away with that 500 Rand cash prize, is Rebecca Ori Crestwell. That is Rebecca Ori Crestwell. Congratulations. You potentially walk away with that 500 Rand cash prize. I'm going to give you a minute to raise your hand down here below to let us know that you are live, you're watching, in order for you to be able to claim your prize. So just comment down here below. The team will also let me know if you have indicated that you are in fact watching and you stand a chance of walking away with that 500 Rand cash prize. Remember, you could also potentially be a winner here on the Private Property Podcast. And all you have to do, we are in a very festive mood and in a very giving mood this week, where we are giving away cash prizes on every episode for the duration of this week. Yesterday, we gave away 1,000 Rand cash to Umkuseli Mla, who was watching us live on air and did raise his hand saying that he is watching. This evening, we're waiting for Rebecca Ori Crestwell to raise her hand to let us know that she's watching. I'm going to give her 30 more seconds to reach out to us. If she doesn't, then we're going to go to the next person. I am waiting for the team to let me know whether whether she's raised her hand to say that she is in fact watching. And if she doesn't raise her hand in the next 10 seconds, then we are going to go to the next person in line. The team has already sent me a potential next person in the event that Rebecca doesn't raise her hand. And all you have to do to stand a chance of walking away with that 500 Rand cash prize is to tell us what you've learned from watching the live podcast, and make sure that you're watching us live, because you need to be able to claim that prize while we are on air. Well, it seems Rebecca's not watching us live. The team has not given me an indication that she is watching. I see one of the team members is typing down here below. So I'm just waiting for them to give me the green light that she has or hasn't replied. And they've just confirmed that she hasn't replied. So the next person in line to walk away with that 500 Rand cash prize, I'm actually going to say who it is so that it is them. As I read what they've written, they can already start letting us know who they are and that they're watching. This one is Sipa Me, and they've spelled their name as CPHA. The surname is MIE. This is also, of course, on Facebook. So Sipa Me, you've written, I've learned many positive things, especially if you want to invest in property, purchasing or selling property, how it's different from other assets or giveaways, and different views or interviews from experts. COVID-19 lockdown is a perfect period to buy #private property 150 episodes. So Spami, we are waiting to hear from you if you're watching us live on air. It's going to be very interesting if you're not, because one of the big things is if you're going to enter a competition with a cash giveaway and the T's and C's say you must be watching live on air, you probably want to make sure that you watch, because I think your odds, I'm not much of a betting woman or entering a lot of competitions, but I'd like to think that those people who do that, tend to read those terms and conditions as much as they can and make sure that they're able to keep up with them. So that's Spami. We are waiting for you on our Facebook page to raise your hand and see if you perhaps are in fact watching, so that you're able to claim your prize. And in the event where you haven't done so, we do have the next person in line that we are going to give that prize to. But I see the team has let me know that Spami is here. So Spami, congratulations. You walk away with that 500 Rand cash prize. The team has just let me know that you are in fact here. And there it is, Spami. Not bad. Thank you. Congratulations there, Spami. Thank you that you were tuned in. You get to walk away with that 500 Rand cash prize right here live on the Private Property Podcast. And that's all you have to do if you want to walk away with that 500 Rand cash prize. Let us know what you've learned on the podcast, and you stand a chance of walking away with that cash prize. You have to be watching us live so that you can raise your hand when we announce you as the winner, and that's how you get to walk away with that money. Well, that's it from me, Zamantungwa Kumalo, here this evening on the Private Property Podcast. It has been a pleasure to be with you. You can find me on social media on @Zamantungwa_K. From us here at Private Property Podcast and the rest of the team, thank you very much for tuning in. We're going to be back on your screen tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. And as usual, until then, hoping you're keeping home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Khumutsapoe, and I'm an entrepreneur from Soweto. Soweto's come a long way, from a small township to a mini city of its own. Soweto's got some really, really nice suburbs, like Deep Kloof Extension, but the locals call it Deep Kloof Expensive. Orlando is known as the suburb that had the first brick houses built in Soweto. Orlando Stadium for its iconic games between Kaizer Chiefs and Pirates. And most importantly, Vilakazi Street, where Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu resided. To the west of Soweto, you find suburbs of Dobsonville and Protea. These two suburbs are actually very cosmopolitan, fresh, young, and very new. Right next door to Soweto, we have a neighboring suburb, which is Eldorado Park. A little adventure and a little fun. Soweto's got so many night spots, from the News Cafe at Mamponya Mall, to your Vilakazi streets at Kumzi's, to just chilling at Chafpozi just between the towers and having a simple braai vleis chisenyama. Something very close to my heart is actually seeing people move back into Soweto, growing businesses, remodeling homes. It merely says to us that Soweto is a growing city. There's way more to this place than what we think. Soweto needs to be discovered daily. I'm so proud to call Soweto my home, and this is my neighborhood.